It's a Friday night in 1947. Rico's Italian restaurant in Manhattan is packed with wealthy diners, enjoying expensive pasta and wine. Then, suddenly, chaos. 500 live rats come pouring out from under tables behind curtains from the kitchen. Women screaming, men jumping on chairs. The entire restaurant evacuates in pure terror. This wasn't an accident. This was revenge. Bumpy Johnson's revenge. Before we get into how Bumpy pulled off one of the most legendary acts of payback in Harlem history, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from right now. Harlem in 1945 was a kingdom, and Bumpy Johnson was its uncrowned king. Every hustler, every business owner, every cop on the beat knew his name. He didn't rule through fear alone. Bumpy ruled through respect, through intelligence, and through an ironclad principle. You protect your community at all costs. The streets were his responsibility. The people were his people. And nobody, and I mean nobody, disrespected Harlem without answering to him. Rico Battaglia didn't get that memo. Rico owned a successful Italian restaurant in Lower Manhattan, a place where politicians and mobsters broke bread together over veal and red wine. He was connected, arrogant, and believed his Italian mob ties made him untouchable. Rico had a waste management contract on the side, which was just a fancy way of saying he controlled where garbage got dumped in the city. Most of it went to designated dumps outside the city. But Rico had another idea, a cheaper idea. Why pay for proper disposal when you could just dump it in Harlem? It started on a Tuesday morning. 3 garbage trucks rolled down 125th Street and just started unloading. Rotten food, broken furniture, restaurant waste. Trash from all over Manhattan piled up on the corners of Harlem streets. The smell was unbearable. Families had to walk past mountains of garbage to get to work, to get their kids to school. This wasn't just unsanitary. This was humiliation. This was Rico Battaglia telling an entire community that they were worthless, that their neighborhood was nothing more than a dumping ground. Word got back to Bumpy within hours. He was sitting in his usual spot at a corner table in Small's Paradise, a jazz club where he conducted most of his business. One of his men, a young runner named Julius, came rushing in, breathless and angry. "Bumpy, you gotta see this." They. Dumping trash all over Lenox Avenue. Trucks just pulled up and unloaded like we're a landfill. Bumpy didn't react immediately. He took a slow sip of his whiskey, let the information settle, then looked up with those cold, calculating eyes that made grown men nervous. "Who's behind it?" he asked quietly. "Some Italian guy named Rico. Owns a restaurant downtown. Word is, he's connected to the Genovese family." Bumpy nodded slowly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Find out everything about this Rico. Bumpy. Johnson wasn't reckless. He didn't move out of anger. Every action he took was calculated, measured, designed to send a message that would echo through the streets long after the moment passed. So before he made his move, he gave Rico Battaglia something most men in his position never got: a warning. 2 days after the trash incident, one of Bumpy's most trusted associates walked into Rico's restaurant during lunch service. He was well-dressed, polite, respectful. He asked to speak with the owner. When Rico came out from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron, Bumpy's man delivered the message clearly and calmly. "Mr. Johnson wanted me to inform you that the trash dumping in Harlem needs to stop immediately. He's asking respectfully that you find another location for your waste disposal. He hopes we can resolve this like businessmen." Rico laughed. Lee laughed. He looked around at his staff, at the customers eating their meals, and then back at Bumpy's messenger with pure contempt. "You go back and tell your boy Bumpy that I dump my trash wherever the hell I want. This is New York City. I got contracts. A tease. I got connections. A tease. What's some black gangster from Harlem gonna do to me? Huh? Tell him if he's got a problem, he can. Take it up with my friends and the family. The messenger didn't argue. He didn't threaten. He just nodded, turned around, and walked out. When he reported back to Bumpy, he repeated Rico's words exactly. Bumpy listened in silence, his face unreadable. Then he did something that chilled everyone in the room. He smiled, not a warm smile. A cold, dangerous smile that meant someone had just made a fatal miscalculation. He thinks I won't do anything because he's Italian, because he's connected. Bumpy leaned back in his chair. We'll see about that. The very next week, Rico sent even more trucks. This time, 6 of them, dumping twice as much garbage on Harlem streets. It was a direct challenge, a slap in the face. Bumpy's response would become legendary. Bumpy called a meeting. Not in a loud club or a public space, but in a basement apartment. On 145th Street, where he handled his most sensitive business. 5 of his most loyal men sat around a small wooden table. These weren't street thugs. These were strategists. Men who'd been with Bumpy through wars with the Italian mob, corrupt cops, and rival gangs. They knew how he operated. They knew when. He was planning something big. We're going to send Rico a message he'll never forget, Bumpy said, lighting a cigarette. But we're not putting hands on him. We're not shooting up his restaurant. That brings heat we don't need. We're going to do something that'll destroy him without firing a single bullet. One of his men, an older guy named West, leaned forward. What you thinking, Bump? Bumpy's eyes gleamed with something between genius and madness. Rats, 500. Of them, live ones. We're going to release them inside his restaurant on the busiest night of the week. The room went silent. Then one by one, smiles crept across their faces. It was brilliant. It was disgusting. It was psychological warfare at its finest. You didn't have to kill a man to destroy him. You just had to ruin his reputation, his business, his pride. And nothing would ruin an upscale Italian restaurant faster than a rat infestation in front of dozens of customers. 500 rats? Someone asked. Where are we going to get that many? Bumpy already had it figured out. This is Harlem. This is New York City. Rats are everywhere. Alleys, basements, the docks, subway tunnels. We trap them, we cage them. And when we got enough, we deliver them straight to Rico's front door. He pointed at West. You're in charge of logistics. Build the cages, get the traps. I want this done in 2 weeks. He looked at another man. You scout the restaurant? I need the layout, the schedule, when it's busiest, where the exits are, how we get in and out without being seen. They all nodded. This wasn't just revenge. This was an operation, precision, timing, execution. Bumpy didn't do anything halfway. If you disrespected Harlem, you didn't just pay a price. You paid the exact price Bumpy decided you owed for. Rico Battaglia. That price was about to come due in the form of 500 hungry, terrified rodents. For the next 2 weeks, Bumpy's crew became the most unlikely hunters in New York City history. They weren't tracking down rival gangsters or dodging cops. They were catching rats, hundreds of them. And let me tell you, catching one rat is hard enough. Catching 500 without getting bitten, without raising suspicion, without anyone figuring out what you're planning. That takes organization. West set up a base of operations in an abandoned warehouse near the Harlem River. He built dozens of wooden crates with wire mesh, each one strong enough to hold 20 or 30 rats without them chewing through. The crew split into teams, working different parts of the city. Some hit the docks at night, where rats the size of small cats fought over scraps from the fish markets. Others worked the subway tunnels, setting traps near the tracks where transit workers rarely went. A few brave souls descended into basement, apartments and alleyways, using bait-stale bread, rotting meat, anything that would lure the rats into cages. It was dangerous work. Rats carry disease. They bite, they scratch. One guy, a young hustler named Pip, got bit on the hand and had to get stitches, but nobody quit. This was for Bumpy. This was for Harlem. Every rat they caught was another act of defiance against the disrespect Rico had shown their community. By the end of the first week, they had 200 rats. By the end of the second week, they'd surpassed 400. The warehouse started to smell like death and filth, but they kept going. Every night, more crates were filled. The rats squealed and clawed at the wire mesh, desperate to escape. Bumpy came by twice to check on progress, and each time he'd walk through the rows of cages with a satisfied look on his face. How many we got? He asked on the final night. West wiped sweat from his forehead and grinned. 512. Bump. We even got extras. Bumpy nodded. Good. Now comes the hard part. We need to keep them alive and hungry until Friday. That's Rico's busiest night. That's when we move. They fed the rats just enough to keep them from dying, but not enough to make them comfortable. By Friday, those rats would be agitated, starving, and ready to tear through anything in their path. Bumpy's team scouted Rico's restaurant throughout the week. They knew the delivery schedule, the back entrance, the timing of the kitchen staffs. Smoke breaks. Everything had to be perfect. One mistake, and the whole plan would fall apart. But Bumpy Johnson didn't make mistakes. And Friday night was coming fast. Friday, October 17th, 1947. Rico's restaurant was packed. Every table filled with well-dressed men and women. It's the kind of people who spent more on one meal than most Harlem families made in a week. The smell of garlic and wine filled the air. A piano player performed in the corner. Waiters in crisp white shirts moved gracefully between tables, delivering plates of pasta, veal, and fresh bread. Rico himself stood near the bar, greeting regulars, shaking hands, playing the role of the successful restaurant. He had no idea what was about to happen. Outside, 3 blocks away, Bumpy's crew was loading the final crates into 2 unmarked delivery trucks. The rats were louder now, more agitated. They sensed something. 500 rats packed into crates, barely fed, frightened, aggressive. This wasn't just a prank. This was biological warfare. Bumpy sat in the passenger seat of the lead truck.com, as ever, smoking a cigarette. He checked his watch. 8:47 p.m. Prime dinner rush. Perfect dot. The trucks pulled into the alley behind Rico's restaurant at exactly 9 p.m. 2 of Bumpy's men, dressed like delivery workers, stepped out and knocked on the back door. A young kitchen worker opened it, expecting a produce delivery. Before he could say anything, one of Bumpy's guys shoved a $50 bill into his hand. Take a smoke break. 10 minutes. Don't ask questions. The kid looked at the money, looked at the trucks, and wisely walked away. Now the door was open. Bumpy's crew moved fast. They hauled crate after crate into the back hallway, into the kitchen, behind the bar, under tables in the dining room. They worked in silence, in shadows, like ghosts. And then, on Bumpy's signal, they started opening the crates, one by one. The rats hesitated for just a second, confused by their sudden freedom. Then, instinct kicked in. They scattered. Dozens. At first, then hundreds, pouring out into every corner of the restaurant. The first scream came from a woman near the window. She looked down and saw a fat gray rat scurrying across her feet. Then another woman screamed. Then a man. Within 30 seconds, the entire dining room realized what was happening. Rats were everywhere, climbing up table legs, running across the bar, darting between chairs. A waiter dropped an entire tray of food and bolted for the exit. Customers jumped onto chairs, onto tables, scrambling to get away. The piano player abandoned his instrument mid-song. Total chaos. Rico came running out from the kitchen, shouting, trying to regain control. But then he saw them. Hundreds of rats swarming his restaurant like a plague. His face went pale. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He knew. In that moment, he knew exactly who was behind this. And he knew he'd made a terrible mistake. By 9:15 p.m., the restaurant was completely empty. Everyone had fled into the street, horrified and traumatized. Bumpy's crew was long gone. And 500 rats had claimed Rico's restaurant as their new home. Saturday morning came with the stench of disaster. Rico arrived at his restaurant before dawn, hoping somehow it had all been a nightmare. It wasn't. The front windows were still intact. The sign still hung above the door, but inside was a war zone. Overturned tables, shattered plates. Food scattered. Everywhere, and the rats. Oh, the rats were still there. They'd nested in the walls, in the kitchen cabinets, under the floorboards. Everywhere Rico looked, he saw movement, heard squeaking, smelled the unmistakable odor of rodent infestation. He called an exterminator. The guy took one look inside and shook his head. "Mr. Battaglia, I've been in this business 20 years. I've never seen anything like this. You've got hundreds of rats in here, maybe more. They've contaminated everything. Your food, your equipment, your furniture. Even if I could kill them all, which would take weeks, the health department is never gonna let you reopen. Not after this." Right on cue, the health inspector showed up. Someone had made an anonymous call. The inspector walked through the restaurant with a clipboard, writing furiously, his face twisted in disgust. When he finished, he handed Rico a citation and a closure notice. "This establishment is shut down indefinitely pending a full investigation and remediation. You're looking at tens of thousands of dollars in damages, minimum, maybe more." Rico tried to argue, tried to explain it was sabotage, but the inspector didn't care. Sabotage or not, this place is a public health hazard. You're done. Word spread fast. By noon, every newspaper in the city had the story. Rat infestation shuts down popular Manhattan restaurant. Customers who'd been there that night told their friends, who told their friends. Rico's reputation, built over years of hard work and mob connections, was destroyed in a single evening. Wealthy clients stopped calling. Reservations were canceled. Investors pulled out. The Italian mobsters, who'd once backed him, wanted nothing to do with the embarrassment. Within a month, Rico's restaurant was bankrupt. The building was sold to pay off debts. Rico himself tried to find out who was responsible, but nobody would talk. He suspected Bumpy, of course, but he had no proof. And even if he did, what could he do? Go to war with Bumpy Johnson over rats? He'd already lost. Bumpy had made sure of that. The message was clear, not just to Rico, but to anyone else who might think about disrespecting Harlem. There are consequences, and Bumpy Johnson decides what those consequences are. Rico left New York 6 months later, broken and humiliated. His restaurant, once a symbol of success, became a symbol of what happens when you underestimate the wrong man. The story of the 500 rats spread through New York like wildfire. In Harlem, people talked about it with pride. Bumpy hadn't fired a single shot, hadn't put a hand on Rico, hadn't even made a public threat. He'd simply responded to disrespect with calculated, devastating precision. The garbage trucks never came back to Harlem. Not from Rico's company, not from anyone else. Word got around fast. You don't mess with Bumpy's neighborhood. You don't treat those streets like a dumping ground. If you do, you'll pay a price you never saw coming. Other business owners who'd considered similar shortcuts suddenly found legitimate waste. Disposal methods. Italian mobsters who'd once dismissed Bumpy as just another black gangster started giving him a wider berth. They realized he wasn't bound by the same rules they were. He didn't need violence to win. He had something more dangerous: creativity, intelligence, and absolute commitment to protecting his community. That made him unpredictable. That made him untouchable. Even the police, who'd been waiting for an excuse to connect Bumpy to something illegal, came up empty. There was no evidence, no witnesses willing to talk. Just a restaurant that happened to get infested with rats. Could have been bad luck, poor sanitation, karma. Nobody could prove otherwise. Bumpy had orchestrated the whole thing without leaving a single fingerprint, literally or figuratively. In the weeks that followed, Bumpy never spoke publicly about what happened. He didn't brag, he didn't boast. That wasn't his style. But everyone knew. When he walked through Harlem, the respect in people's eyes was different, deeper. He'd stood up for them in a way that required genius, patience, and nerve. He'd proven once again why he was the man you wanted on your side, and the last man you wanted as an enemy. Rico's empty restaurant became a landmark of sorts, a reminder etched into the city's memory. Some people walked past it and laughed. Others shook their heads in disbelief. But everyone understood the lesson. Respect isn't just given, it's earned. And when it's violated, there will be a reckoning. Bumpy Johnson had delivered that reckoning with 500 rats and an iron will. The Italian mob learned. The city learned. And Harlem stood a little taller, knowing they had a protector who would go to extraordinary lengths to defend their dignity. The rat revenge became folklore. Decades later, old-timers in Harlem still told the story to young kids, teaching them about pride, strategy, and standing up for your community. It wasn't just about Bumpy's victory over Rico. It was about what that victory represented. In an era when black neighborhoods were constantly disrespected, marginalized, and treated as less than by people in power, Bumpy had proven that dignity could be defended. That justice didn't always come from a courtroom or a badge. Sometimes it came from the streets. It's delivered by someone who refused to accept disrespect. What made this story legendary wasn't the violence, there was none. It was the brilliance. Bumpy could have easily sent his guys to beat up Rico, burn down his restaurant, or worse. That's what most gangsters would have done. Quick, brutal, effective. But Bumpy understood something deeper. Physical violence would have brought police attention, mob retaliation, and endless cycles of revenge. It would have made him look like a common thug. Instead, he chose psychological warfare. He humiliated Rico in a way that couldn't be answered with bullets. You can't shoot rats. You can't negotiate with an infestation. You can only accept defeat and move on. That's the genius of Bumpy Johnson. He saw 10 steps ahead. He understood. That true power isn't about who can throw the hardest punch. It's about who can control the narrative, who can deliver consequences that stick, who can make someone regret their actions without giving them a clear target to retaliate against. The 500 rats weren't just pests. They were symbols. Every single one represented a piece of garbage that had been dumped in Harlem. Every single one was a lesson being taught to Rico and anyone watching. This story also revealed Bumpy's deep connection to his community. He didn't defend Harlem because it was profitable or strategic. He did it because those were his people. Those streets raised him. That neighborhood gave him purpose. When someone disrespected Harlem, they disrespected his home, his identity, his legacy. And Bumpy protected what was his with the same intensity a king protects his kingdom. That's why people loved him. That's why his name still carries weight today. He wasn't just a gangster. He was a protector, a strategist, a symbol of resistance against those who believed they could treat black communities however they wanted. The legend of the 500 rats ensured that Bumpy Johnson's name would never be forgotten. It became a story told in barbershops, on street corners, in history books. A reminder that intelligence beats brute force, that creativity beats violence, and that when you disrespect the wrong person, the consequences might come in a form you never imagined. So let's recap this incredible story. It started with blatant disrespect. Rico Battaglia, a connected Italian restaurant owner, decided that Harlem was nothing more than a convenient garbage dump. He sent trucks full of trash into the community, humiliating the people who lived there, treating them like they didn't matter. When Bumpy Johnson heard about it, he didn't react with immediate violence. He gave Rico a warning, a chance to make things right like men of business. But Rico laughed in his face. He mocked Bumpy. He doubled down on the disrespect. That was his fatal mistake. Bumpy responded with one of the most creative acts of revenge in organized crime history. He gathered 500 live rats, planned every detail with military precision, and unleashed them inside Rico's restaurant on the busiest night of the week. The chaos was instant. The damage was total. Rico's business was destroyed. His reputation was ruined. His connections abandoned him, and he had no one to blame but himself. Bumpy never had to fire a shot. He didn't need to. Rats did all the talking. The aftermath sent shockwaves through New York. Trash dumping in Harlem stopped immediately. Other criminals thought twice before disrespecting Bumpy's neighborhood. The Italian mob gained a new level of respect for the man from Harlem, who fought with his mind instead of his fists. And the community saw what it meant to have someone truly willing to defend them, no matter what it took. The lesson here is timeless. Respect matters, dignity matters. And when someone violates those principles, there will be consequences. Bumpy Johnson understood that power isn't just about muscle. It's about strategy, patience, and the willingness to do what others won't even imagine. He turned rat screechers most people fear and despise into weapons of justice. That's the mark of a true mastermind. This story also teaches us about standing up for what's right. Bumpy didn't have to defend Harlem. He was already powerful, already wealthy, already feared. But he did it anyway, because those streets were his home. That community was his family. And when you love something, you protect it. Not with empty words, not with half measures. You protect it with everything you've got. If you enjoyed this story, smash that like button right now. Subscribe to the channel, because I've got dozens more stories about Bumpy Johnson, the Harlem underworld, and the legends who shaped New York history. Drop a comment and let me know. Do you think Bumpy's revenge was justified? Was it genius or too extreme? What's the craziest act of revenge you've ever heard of? I read every comment. Next video. I'm telling you about the time Bumpy went head-to-head with the NYPD and embarrassed them so badly they tried to erase it from the records. You don't want to miss that. Till then, remember, respect is earned. Dignity is defended, and consequences are real. Stay smart. Stay strong. I'll see you in the next one.